It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Arlen Schumer. Hey, Arlen, how are you?
Hey, Doug, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. So, you're a pretty famous guy, yeah? I think.
Oh, please. I think I'm laboring in obscurity. I never would consider myself famous.
Oh, well, I don't know. We looked you up on Google, and you came up all over the place. So,
well, that's nice. That's nice to know, you know.
Award-winning comic book style illustrator. Why do they call you comic book style? Because you don't actually do comic books?
Right. You see, that's the thing. I love comics. I lecture on comic history. I would consider myself a comic book historian. I did a book called The Silver Age of Comic Book Art about the era I grew up in, the Silver Age, the 1960s and 70s. And, and I became an illustrator who works in a comic book style. I never really wanted to do comics, although people look at my art and they assume I've done comics. Look, I even studied after college with Neil Adams, one of the legendary comic book artists who was my childhood idol and that of a generation's. And, I went through that teenage year period where maybe I thought I was going to be a comic book artist. But once I got to Rhode Island School of Design and learned about graphic design, that it was the melding of words and images, which is what comics are too, that appealed to me more. And ironically, though I got my education in graphic design, I ended up making my living more as an illustrator. But my thing was, I don't think I have the patience really to do comics themselves. I mean, a 24-page comic for me would be like a year's worth of work. I mean, God bless these guys, all of my heroes that can do 24 pages a month, but that was never going to be me. The idea of illustration, for me, it's a single image. And then my attention span, I have to move on to the next image. So it takes a very special calling to be a comic book artist. It looks simple, but it's deceptively complex. And not that illustration isn't, but, I wanted to bring good comic book art into the field of commercial illustration with the same impact that Roy Lichtenstein brought comic book art into the fine art world back in the early 60s.
Okay.
So I'd like to think that in my career to date, that there are still plenty of mountains I want to climb, but I'd like to think that I've accomplished that in terms of the actual work I've done over the years to accomplish that goal.
Well, doing an actual comic book is kind of a two-step process in the sense that most of the people who write the stories do not do the illustrations as well, right?
I don't know if I would say most. I'd say these days, maybe it's more like half and half. Commercial comics, the Marvel and DC typical mainstream product, yeah, that's mostly writers and artists separately.
Right.
But in the world of independent comics, that's a whole, what used to be called underground comics. Now there's really no underground anymore. But they're the equivalent of independent like bands and, in music versus,
record labels
signed,
right.
To major labels. So in the independent comic world, I would say more than less write and draw their own material.
Well, I'm just thinking of somebody like Stan Lee. I mean, he was a great writer and very famous, but I don't think he did the drawings.
Well, he didn't do the drawings at all.
No.
And in fact, not to go off on a tangent, because we can easily fill up one of your segments on just the Stan Lee / Jack Kirby controversy, but I personally don't believe Stan Lee created or wrote anything original. I think that if you know the process that he worked on with artists and storytellers like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, who created Spider-Man, the drawings came first. The artists would draw out the stories like silent movies on paper. Then Stan Lee would get those. And remember, he was the editor too.
Right.
So the job of an editor when you work with creative people is, you sometimes give them, what were called springboards of ideas. The famous comic book Marvel Comics version of what I'm talking about is the urban legend that goes Stan Lee calling up Jack Kirby sometime in the summer of 1965 and saying, "Hey, Jack, for the next issue of the Fantastic Four, let's have him fight a really big villain." Now, that's something an editor would say. But then Jack Kirby is in his basement studio in a little house in Long Island, and he comes up with what became known as the Galactus Silver Surfer Trilogy, which he draws out like a silent movie on paper with margin notes for Stan Lee to put in the dialogue and the captions. Stan Lee would get those beautiful pages penciled out in front of him, and in his own words, he said it was like filling in a crossword puzzle.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
But then in the end, the credits that Stan Lee himself wrote says edited by Stan Lee, written by Stan Lee, and only penciled by Jack Kirby. So to the mind of the comic book reader and the layman, oh, that means Stan Lee wrote this. That means he created these concepts and the story and the characters. But no, that's not what he did. And yet he took credit for it till the day he died. Whereas Jack Kirby, out of his imagination, the entire Marvel Comics universe comes. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the Avengers movies, these are all the creations of a guy named Yaakov Kurtzberg, who grew up on the Lower East Side of New York City. Never went to college, self-taught, autodidact, changes his name to Jack Kirby, co-creates Captain America in the 40s, and in the 60s, pretty much creates the entire Marvel Comics universe that is now responsible for 3/4 of our popular culture. Am I right?
Yeah, I would agree. Well, you were right also. We could get off on a real tangent about this. And
yeah, but of all the people you brought up Stan Lee. And it's my duty. I run a Facebook group on Jack Kirby. And it's all about these issues amongst, showing Jack Kirby's work.
Well, I didn't mean to hit a sore spot with you. It's just the reason
it's not a sore spot. It's just, it's a big part of comic book history.
Right.
That's still being debated to this day.
The reason I brought him up is because I had a guy on yesterday who was part of the Stan Lee Foundation, and he just happened to click into my head. So.
Oh, what was his name?
Brimstone.
See, now I don't think I know that name.
That's his stage name. He's involved in all kinds of stuff. But his interview will be up next week sometime on my show, so you can check it out if you like. The one thing I did want to ask you about comic books, and then I also want to hit on the Twilight Zone, is now comic books have been around for a long time, but are they still done in the same way, or are they done computer graphics now?
Oh, well, just like all printing is done on the computer now, but many of them are drawn by hand outside the computer. Some people are drawing digitally, but by and large, comics are still a handcrafted medium, but they use the computer as a tool. All files are digital now. Okay. When you deliver comics to the printer, just like, Time magazine goes to the printer.
Right. Okay. I remember seeing a documentary show on Walt Disney it was a film that was done probably in the late 30s through the war, the 40s, and just seeing the room of like hundreds of guys sitting at drafting boards, drawing all day long, frame by frame by frame, to make a 1-minute cartoon.
Yeah.
And I would assume that they don't do it like that anymore.
Well, they're all doing it, but they're on the computer.
But they're on the computer.
And they might be in their homes or they're in offices at studios in Hollywood. Do you see the end credits of these Marvel Universe movies? It's like the population of a small city. And those are all artisans,
CGI guys, really. Yeah.
People on computers creating all the imagery you're looking at. The actors are standing in green screen boxes while they're being filmed, acting out their parts. Everything else you're seeing in these films is pretty much now done on the computer.
Yeah.
And, those are artists, and all their names are listed, but, there's a million of them.
I just had this conversation with Joe Wallenstein, who is a famous producer, and he runs the USC Film School now. And we were talking about the budgets on some of these, Marvel comic type and Star Wars and, what's the other one? Avatar, the heavy CGI kind of movie.
Yeah.
And we couldn't, we were debating like, well, why has the price gone up? Because you would think it would be a lot cheaper to do CGI than to do building full sets in a back lot and blah, blah, blah.
But that's exactly what they're doing now.
But when you said that, have you seen the credits? There's where the money went. It might be,
of course.
Yeah. It's to pay all the people.
It's on talent,
right?
It's creating those special effects costs money because you're using state of the art technology and state of the art talented people.
Right. So I mean that's where it went.
Of course.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk a little bit about your other book, Visions from the Twilight Zone. Is that
right?
Okay.
It's out of print, but it's the first coffee table art book about the Twilight Zone, in which I extracted dialogue and narration from the episodes and then typeset that dialogue to read like spoken word poetry almost. And then I took images from the show and printed them and designed them to look like black and white art photography.
Oh, cool. It's too
and
bad
that's what Visions from the Twilight Zone is all about. It's still available, on Amazon. There's a limited edition hardcover, as well as the more mass trade paperback. But, it came out a long time ago in 1990. In fact, you mentioned USC Film School. In 1991, when my book came out, I lectured at the USC Film School on the Twilight Zone.
Oh.
Based on my book. And I still do a multimedia lecture. It's posted on my website. You go to arlenschumer.com. There's a Twilight Zone icon on the homepage. You click on that, and you'll see the multimedia projects I've done in addition to my book. But they're all outgrowths from the book, from the words and images of the series itself.
Well, it certainly was a show ahead of its time. I'm a big fan of that show. I've watched.
Who isn't? Everybody loves the Twilight Zone.
Except my mother. But
we got to work on your mother.
She doesn't understand it, I think. But so what was it? What was it? Why was it so important to pop culture then, do you think?
My recent webinar was called The Twilight Zone in the Age of Corona, in which I chose about 17 episodes that deal with the themes of isolation, loneliness, solitude, separation from society. The very first Twilight Zone episode, called Where Is Everybody, is all about a guy that is stranded in a deserted American town. I mean, you can't get any more socially distanced than that.
Right.
And I showed how these episodes, and I showed clips from the episodes along with still images and other images from the popular culture to reinforce this idea that Serling and company, the other great writers, Richard Matheson, Charles Beaumont, among them, Serling was a visionary of the 60s, a visionary of the future, that in these episodes, they fulfill the definition of art. Art has to be both of its time and timeless. So some of these episodes are not only of their time, they're about the threat of nuclear war, some of the great episodes. Serling had an episode about the Cuban Missile Crisis 2 years before the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right, he did.
Meaning when people describe what it was like those 2 weeks, people really thought the bomb was going to drop and that was going to be it. And Serling has an episode based on a Richard Matheson short story about being on the brink of nuclear war and that feeling. And yet it was 2 years before the Cuban Missile Crisis. So now you watch the episode as a timeless work of art because it was of its time, but it still speaks of, today. Meaning, some of these fears, there were episodes that forecast global warming in a weird way. But Serling and thinking television could be art. that it didn't have to be trash interrupted by commercials. You know, when Twilight Zone aired, every other TV show, Doug, was a Western. And I'm not exaggerating when I say every other TV show.
No, I agree.
That's what it was like back then. Cookie cutter Westerns. And Serling was a visionary in so many ways. He had women in dramatic starring roles at a time when the only women on television were screwball comedians like Lucille Ball or domesticated housewives like Donna Reed.
Right.
Serling cast black men in leading dramatic roles on Twilight Zone episodes years ahead of his time when there were no black people on television. One of his Twilight Zone episodes that aired in early 1960 is about a black boxer. Now, Serling boxed when he was in World War II. But here is a black boxer starring in a dramatic television show 6 months before Muhammad Ali appears on the scene in the 1960 Rome Summer Olympics. So even within the time period, Serling is ahead of his time in doing that. So he's got women, minorities, all the things that are now part of our current culture 60 years later.
Do you have a favorite episode?
Of course.
Which one?
Well, you know, it's funny. Ever since the internet era, and there's all these Twilight Zone groups, and there's internet polls of favorite episodes. This episode, pre-internet, used to always be everybody's favorite. It's since kind of finished like third behind episodes that I don't think are better than it. And it's the episode called Eye of the Beholder, the woman getting plastic surgery.
Oh, okay, with the pig-faced doctor one. That
with the pig faces revealed at the end. Spoiler alert for anybody out there listening that hasn't seen it. There are so many reasons. I mean, I've written essays about this episode. There are so many reasons why it's the greatest episode. But for the pig faces alone, you know, when you look at them, especially if you remember what it was like to see them for the first time, whether you were a child, whether you were older, growing up with the Twilight Zone reruns, those faces, you'd have to know what I'm talking about, people listening in, to know what I'm about to say. They ride the line between comedy and horror.
Yeah.
Do you know how hard that line is to ride? When you look at those pig faces, as we call them, they're both immediately ridiculous looking and kind of funny, and at the same time, they're repellently horrible.
Yeah. It was also the way that particular episode was lit. They lit it really, really well from a production standpoint.
The director, Douglas Hayes, who I interviewed for my book, by the way, when, you know, he's now, you know, long gone, but when I interviewed him for my book, he choreographed that episode because he couldn't show the doctors and nurses' faces. That was the artistic, audacious conceit of the episode. But that's what also makes it so stylized. And almost like, I mean, it's a true work of video art. Even though it was shot on film, and that's what gives it a timeless look as well. You know, these Twilight Zone episodes, especially if you get them on the Blu-ray DVDs, they look like they were filmed, you know, yesterday in an experimental theater in the East Village. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, they look better now than they did.
That's what I'm saying. They still look, they're basically 2-act plays filmed for television.
Yeah.
And when you watch the greatest episodes, they have a very stage-like, stylized quality that I tried to capture in my photographic images from the show that I use in my webinars and my books and my various projects.
That particular episode, I think, that was Donna Douglas, right?
Yes, who later, a year later,
Ellie Mae
on the Beverly Hillbillies. But yet she wasn't the actress playing the bandaged patient getting plastic surgery. That was an actress who just recently passed away, just like Donna Douglas recently passed away just a couple years ago. Her name was Maxine. Oh, I always forget her last name. I want to say Maxine Waters, but Maxine Waters is the the congresswoman, right, from California. Yeah. It's Maxine, and I always forget her last name. The point is, when you watch this episode, she can only act with her hands. Her face is bandaged up,
right?
Obviously, which is a very surreal image unto itself. That the fact that most of the episode we're looking at this totally blank mannequin-like, and it's not even mannequin-like, it's literally a blank surface, which makes it almost, it's David Lynchian. I mean,
that's a good analogy.
And again, when I lecture on this episode, last fall was the 60th anniversary of its airing, and I did a webinar on it. But I'll do it every year on its anniversary, November 10th. But I kind of show it that way, and I make those comparisons because the episode can absolutely live up to it. And then, of course, there's the message. There's Serling's morals. There's what the essence of the Twilight Zone. When, beauty is in the eye of the beholder is the definition of art itself.
Sure it is, yeah. Can I tell you my favorite episode, and then we kind of have to wrap this up. My favorite episode is Willoughby.
Willoughby, next stop, Willoughby.
Yeah, that one. And I know it's probably not one of his best episodes, but reason...
No, that's not true. It is one of his best episodes.
Okay, well, I'm glad you agree.
First of all, it's totally autobiographical. It takes place in Westport, Connecticut, where I happen to live today. And when he was in Westport in the 50s, commuting into the city to work on these live television plays that won him the Emmys, that gave him the creative clout to be given a television show in 1959 when no creative person was in charge of a TV show. Serling is the first person. Nowadays, we talk about showrunners, and all the creators have their own shows.
Right.
Vince Gilligan owns Breaking Bad, and David Kelly is another. You know what I mean?
Right.
But Serling, again, was a first. He was the visionary, because back then, film television in Los Angeles was considered slumming. It was considered, a trash medium.
Yeah.
Serling believed, and he says this in an interview with Mike Wallace, believe it or not, 10 days before Twilight Zone debuts on October 2nd, 1959. And Wallace actually says to Serling, well, Rod, now that you're going to be doing the Twilight Zone, does that mean you're not going to be writing anything important for television?
Oh, God.
You see, they thought the 50s live TV, they were called television playwrights, and the critics loved those 90-minute things, and that's where Serling made his bones. And after winning his third Emmy for those 90-minute live things, live television, even though it was a critic's darling, the ratings were low, and it was expensive to produce. It was a lot cheaper to make it, filming it in Los Angeles. So in the same time the Giants and the Dodgers moved out of New York to L.A., that's when television moved to the West Coast, and it's never left. And Serling had to decide, do I want to stay in television or go to the movies like his peers, Paddy Chayefsky, who wrote Marty, Reginald Rose, who wrote 12 Angry Men. They went to the movies to write screenplays because film television was so déclassé. You know what I mean?
And Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz were one of the first ones to do film, right? They used film instead of...
Right, I Love Lucy. And
Lucy.
Desi Lou is responsible for giving Serling the break he needed to do the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
When he goes out to L.A. after living in Westport, that makes him write a stop at Willoughby. He writes a 1-hour show called The Time Element, and it airs on Desilu. They decided to put it on air. And it's really the kind of pilot episode of The Twilight Zone in a weird way, because the ratings and the audience response to that show when it aired in 1958, I believe, was the biggest response a TV show had ever gotten. So the producers went to Rod Serling and go, what else do you got like The Time Element? And he goes, you know what? I got this thing called The Twilight Zone. I mean, that's basically what happened. He realized he could do all the things he used to do in those 90-minute live teleplays, but he was always having to fight the censors to say what he wanted to say. But he realized through science fiction, through treating science fiction seriously, like the literature, not like the crappy movies from the 50s with the bug-eyed monsters. Serling was the first one to legitimize what was a cloistered, cult medium. Science fiction literature was pretty much read by the people that wrote it and a small number of fans that read those pulp magazines that Ray Bradbury and guys like that, Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont, were published in. But Serling took those science fiction stories and brought them to this new medium called television, to film television. And that's what he answered Mike Wallace with that condescending question. He goes, yeah, I believe in a half hour we could tell stories that are meaningful, that relate the real world. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. And you could find that Mike Wallace interview, on the internet. And it's brilliant when you see Serling. And there he is, Serling, the avatar of the 60s, which would be the decade of a creative explosion across all genres and mediums that would, in a sense, legitimize this idea that commercial art can be fine art, in a sense. And that's what Andy Warhol was all about.
Right.
When he said fine art was
Andy
commercial
Warhol.
art and commercial art was fine art. That's what the Beatles were all about when they said, you know what? A 3-minute pop song can be a work of art.
Right.
Along with Bob Dylan legitimizing it at the same time. But, that's what the 60s were about. Serling was doing that with the Twilight Zone starting in 1959. And episodes like A Stop at Willoughby about this commuter who is can't take the pressure of the rat race. It's like an episode of Mad Men 50 years earlier. Yeah, and he comes home to his materialist shrew of a wife who only is married to him to get all the trappings of a successful Madison Avenue lifestyle.
Well, save for the wife, I had that experience for 20 years in Boston, and it just rang so true that it just one night.
So did I. I lived that episode.
Yeah.
In Westport, exactly where it took place.
Arlen,
and basically, it's Serling advancing. The character at one point says to his wife, some people aren't built for competition or rich communities they don't feel comfortable in or country clubs they wear around their neck like a badge of status. This is Serling being the visionary of the 60s and the generation gap and the whole anti-materialist counterculture.
Anti-establishment, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
This guy wanted to turn on, tune in, and drop out. And his wife left him. And what does he do in the end? He jumps off the train and kills himself.
On to a better place. We got to wrap this up, Arlen. Yeah. Unfortunately, we have just blown right through our time. You're right. This could have been a 1 or 2 hour interview.
Well, anytime you want to continue it, I'm available.
Give out your website, please, so people can come check you out.
It's arlenschumer.com, and make sure you spell my name right, ARLENSCH, like Chuck and Amy, UMER. And on my website, you'll see an events blog with all of my webinars, and there are links. Some of my webinars I do with a company called New York Adventure Club that you have to pay to see. That's nyadventureclub.com. And then others I do on my own that I do for free, like one I'm doing Wednesday night, the 28th, on the great comic book artist Joe Kubert, who is famous for Sergeant Rock and Hawkman and great DC Comics characters like that.
Okay.
And then I'm doing webinars upcoming on Sean Connery's James Bond and on other comic book history. So, just go to my website. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I don't hide behind pseudonyms, Twitter, Tumblr, all that kind of stuff. So, Facebook friend me. I run 3 comics history groups. And again, on my website, you'll see my works on Twilight Zone. I'm a Bruce Springsteen historian, and I have creative works on his material as well. So, definitely a lot of content on my website. So if content is king, Doug, I'm king of the county.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. It's nice meeting you, and very nice talking
Thanks for having me, Doug.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Love coffee, huh? But wait a minute. It seems like every time you finish a cup of coffee, you get all of these side effects along with it. Heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, acid reflux. As the world's first and only organic acid-free coffee, Tyler's Coffee is able to provide a healthier option in the solution for more than 100 million individuals who have sensitive stomachs or suffer from acid-related modalities. This is Tyler's acid-free coffee. Coffee without the consequences.
Hi, this is John Morgan, production supervisor for DJC Productions. You're listening to The Douglas Coleman Show.
Okay, please welcome to The Douglas Coleman Show, Travis and Cyndy Barnes. Hey, Travis and Cyndy, how are you?
Good.
Hi.
Thanks for having us on the show.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. So your story is really interesting. I was just looking at your bio. Why don't you just tell it? Tell us your story, and then we can talk about your book and then what you're doing now.
All right. Well, terrific. Well, I guess we'll begin where our story begins, which our story, the book, Journey Fitness, is not a fitness book. It's about overcoming adversities of life and living your dreams. And so Cyndy and I, we had to overcome a lot. We just shared before we got on this show that we both shared the connection of Las Vegas. I came to Las Vegas as a young man, and I really was impressed how you could live all 24 hours there, and I did my best to try that. And so that didn't work out so well for me. I did have a little bit of a wayward journey during Cyndy and I's early years, which involved drugs, and it led me to incarceration. And now Cyndy is known by some of our friends as Saint Cyndy, because she did that whole 10 years worth of incarceration with me. She was still there waiting for me when I came home. And that time away allowed me to have a lot of reflection and allowed me to rediscover my passions. And when I came home, I got reconnected with the thing that I've been doing my whole life, which was fitness. While I was in prison, I trained people for prison currency, tunas and stamps. And then when I came home, it was actually Cyndy who helped me get a job when I came home. You were putting in my resumes at local gyms. And this is the story of Journey Fitness. Actually, takes you a little bit through prison, but then it mostly picks up where I come home and I'm working hard, as many people do, for other people. And I'm doing my best to make a way for myself and my family and get us a home of our own. So I quickly grow from trainer to manager to chief operations officer of multiple fitness locations. And then after we get this house of our own, it's flooded to the second floor within, how long was it, Cyndy?
Well, less than 2 months. We hadn't even made one mortgage payment yet when the flood happened.
Yeah.
So we wound up in a FEMA trailer for 18 months.
Yeah, and so while being in that FEMA trailer with no insurance to rebuild our home and just kind of rebuilding at nights and weekends, the owner of that company that I was working for decided to let us go. Well, actually let me go. He wasn't letting you go that day.
No.
Yeah. So
but I left.
Yeah.
Same day.
It was a bit like the Jerry Maguire movie, because I was working so many hours for him and so committed to the company that they were all wondering, what's Travis going to do when we let him go? If you can picture it in your mind, that Jerry Maguire movie where Jerry's like, I know y'all think I'm going to flip out, and he's like, who's coming with me? He's taking the fish out of the fish tank. And so that was me. I was like, well, all right, here I go. And it felt pretty lonely, but Cyndy, who had always been by my side, stayed by my side, and she was actually conducting a group session at the time that they were letting me go, and so somebody else had to complete that group training session for her, and we both walked out the doors of that gym and became traveling trainers for a period of time. That was interesting. You remember picking Destiny up from school between those two?
Yeah, Destiny's our daughter, who is now 19. But yeah, we had a little Nissan Sentra, and we would cram stability balls in there. We'd pick her up from school, and she'd be smushed in the middle between two big stability balls, and the trunk of our car was busting right through with all the heavy kettlebells and dumbbells that we'd lug around, and so it was interesting for a while until Journey Fitness started.
Well, let me stop you there for a second. I want to go back to a couple of things, and then we can continue on. Regarding your time in prison, you said that you spent a decade in prison. That's a long time. Were you arrested for dealing? Because it says nonviolent. I can't imagine they would put anybody in prison for 10 years just for being a user.
Well, full confession here. I used and I sold to support my habit and all those things. But actually, interestingly, the way that our drug laws have been, it was 21 days prior to the time of my crime that they created the Methamphetamine Anti-Proliferation Act. And what that meant was that pseudoephedrine and methamphetamine and all those things were going to be hit much harder. And so the thing that I went to jail for 10 years for actually would have been probationable just 21 days earlier. So I went to jail for pseudoephedrine, which was interesting. I went to prison. I guess we can't call it jail, but I had given someone a ride, and we drove into the middle of a federal investigation because there were people that were selling large quantities of pseudoephedrine, and they wanted to catch them, and they were doing it in multiple states, which is what made it federal. And so it was really just drawing a couple of really unlucky cards there. First of all, to have it be federal, to have it be just 21 days after the Methamphetamine Anti-Proliferation Act. And let me tell you, that was an interesting thing to be put in prison for 10 years for pseudoephedrine, because when you get a lengthy sentence, you're immediately sent to higher securities and you're paired up with higher level criminals. I remember the first time that I was actually shackled to somebody and put on a bus. They had a swastika on their forehead, and everybody seems to have this conversation of like, well, what are you in for, right? And so I asked him, what he was in for, and he said institutional murder. And I guess that means that he had killed somebody while in prison, and so he was sentenced for that. And then he said to me, "What are you in for?" And I said, so it was, interesting, but I did a lot of things that I should not have done to support my addiction. So even though I was sentenced for pseudoephedrine, of course, there were things that I did to support my habit that were wrong and criminal. So I think it goes that way with a lot of addicts. At first, maybe you're able to try to function while you're doing a drug and you keep your regular job, and then you lose your regular job, and then you're like, well, if I can sell a little bit, then I can support my habit, and it just kind of evolves from there. And that was pretty much my story.
What year was that?
When Cyndy and I met in Vegas, it was 1998, and then it was just around 2000 that I was going to prison, and it was 2010 when I came home. So pretty much the first decade of the millennium.
Well, so this was the Clinton administration war on drugs thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got to be
you got to be a part of that. Yeah. Well, congratulations. The second question I wanted to ask you is, you said 2 months after you bought a home, Tropical Storm Lee flooded your home. That wasn't in Vegas, I don't think, was it?
No.
So actually, when Travis was sentenced, because it's federal, which is, it was a whole learning experience. Federal, you can do your time anywhere in the United States. So I moved back to his hometown with our daughter, and he was shipped to Pennsylvania. And that's where he was born, was in Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania. So that's where our daughter and myself lived and visited him every weekend and stuff. So, yeah, that's what wound us back. Was where his family was that. So I moved here with his family for family support.
When you got out, Travis, did you have any trouble getting employment because of your criminal record?
And that's an interesting story in itself, because I was very worried. I was very concerned. I was like, somebody that's been in prison for 10 years,
right?
There's a lot of different things that happen. Like, for instance, your license expires. I'm retaking a driver's test like I'm 16 years old again, just to have a license, and all kinds of things. And so you wonder, is anybody going to hire me? I don't have any work history. If I'm being completely transparent, I've been in prison for the last 10 years, so who's going to hire me? So Cyndy was putting in my resume at different fitness centers saying, this is what he does, so let's see if we can get him a job there. And they're calling me at the halfway house. Did you ever see the movie Major League with Charlie Sheen, where he gets a call and he's still in prison and they're asking him to come to spring training camp?
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
Like a little bit, because they were trying to call me, and in the halfway house was a shared payphone where if it rang too many times, it went to something that sounded like a fax machine, but it wasn't. And otherwise, sometimes being a community phone, other people would answer it. And if you weren't standing around, then it's like, no, he's not here right now. So when the employer that was looking for me finally gets a hold of me, he says, yeah, it's been tough to get a hold of you. Sometimes we call and it seems to go to a fax machine, and then I think we called before and your roommate answered and said you weren't there. And I said, yeah, I'm going through a transition right now. And, so I was able to get an interview. I was able to get a job, and that was the job that I worked my way up from trainer to manager to chief operations officer before eventually, being liberated to the workforce or fired, however you want to put it.
Well, they fired you because of what? Of the storm? Or it was unclear why you got let go.
It's interesting because I was actually really becoming much more the face of that business than the owner. The owner of that business, he had a physical therapy and fitness. And it seemed like there were some things starting to where he really wanted to be more the face himself and just kind of take back the reins. And I think that was going to make my position no longer necessary.
Yeah, well, for me, I want to just add something to that. When Travis first started working at that company, there was literally 3 training clients, and it was an open gym other than that. The day that he was let go, there was almost 150 training clients. So it was not necessarily a failing business because it was open gym access, but it wasn't a thriving business. And once Travis got in there, it really did start to thrive. And Travis opened 4 additional locations for this company in other towns. And it was being very much talked about in the community, and Travis was being talked about. And I think there was a little bit of jealousy that was going on, and people thought Travis owned the company and not the owner of the company.
I think there was a lot of jealousy going on. I can just see how this is turning out. You were doing all the work, and he wanted to take all the credit, basically.
Exactly.
Well, and it was interesting because we got the opportunity to be part of a book that was going to be published called Results Fitness. And of course, just being an employee for the company, I decided to, of course, include the owner of the company as the author of our section of the book. And even though, I just wrote it and included him in it. But then we go to our local library for a book signing, and he had ripped down the flyer and said, Did you make this flyer? My name's not on it. And I was like, oh, no, I don't make the flyers for the library, but I knew by the way that he was acting that I'm like, I don't think I'm going to have my job very much longer because he seems to be pretty upset over where this is at, And so, yeah, it seemed all things happen, though, either for you or to you. And clearly that one in the end eventually happened for us to now be where we're at today, having our own company.
Well, so not to fast forward too much, but obviously it looks like from your bio and from your website that you guys are doing well. How's he doing these days?
Well, he wound up selling his company overall, so I think he's mostly like a retired consultant. Okay. His main focus was physical therapy, and but he just had a desire for the fitness to be, of course, less about me and more about him. Now he's a retired consultant.
Yeah. So. Okay. Well, then things worked out. So after that, after you got fired from that place, then, okay, just tell me the next step right from there.
Yeah. So that's when we became traveling trainers. We said, well, what are we going to do? You know, we're in a FEMA trailer. We don't have any employment. And there were things that we contemplated. And I think this is important for listeners too, because it's important to follow your passions. It was a difficult decision to follow our passions. At the time, there was a gas boom going on in our area, and it would have been easy to take another job that was something I was less passionate about. But Cyndy agreed that we could be traveling trainers together, which is a tough thing to agree to when you're being let go from employment around the holidays and living in a FEMA trailer. But we did it, and throughout that time of about 6 months as traveling trainers.
Yeah, because we were let go. Well, Travis was let go, and I left with him the first week in December, so just after Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. So Christmas was literally 3 weeks away, and yeah.
And so then eventually we got this opportunity. It was interesting how it comes about, and this isn't to promote any sort of one faith over another, but my father was going to church with this lady that had a commercial space, and he said, oh, you got to come check out this space that this woman has. Now, that was a half hour away from our nearest client, which we didn't think was good, being traveling trainers and not having clients in an area and not having any money. We're on an unemployment check. We're living in a FEMA trailer. But my father was persistent enough. I don't know if you've ever done this, but we decided we'd just go to appease him, and then that way we wouldn't have to talk about it anymore. So we went and we toured this space, and this lady, she's a real churchgoer. She had all these Christian quotes on her wall. Her name was Rosa Giamichael, great lady. Her and her husband Ray owned the place, and she was playing this church music. And so we had a plan for what we would say to her. Cyndy, you remember what the script was going to be?
Yes.
Yeah, tell them what.
Thank you very much, ma'am. You have a beautiful space. Right now we have no money, but if we ever have some money, we will gladly let you know.
Yeah, and so we got to the end of our tour, and she was very excited. You know, she's like, oh, you'll be able to do this over here and this over there. And so we got to the end of the tour, and we told it just like we rehearsed. And she said to us, well, I don't care about any of that. All I know is God told me you're supposed to be here.
So when are you moving in?
So when you're moving in, she says, yeah. And we're like,
wow.
What? You know, and so that was a strange surprise. And so began Journey Fitness, because we were given an opportunity to come in on a couple months free rent, and we took a high interest loan for equipment, as it needed to be. You know, when you're unemployed and you're looking for a loan, it's going to be a high interest one if you get it. And we got a little bit of credit with the newspaper for our advertising. Back then, newspaper advertising was still working pretty well. And so began Journey Fitness with that kind of scenario.
Wow. Now that is a cool story. I quite enjoy that. I want to go back to one thing you said, traveling trainers. I have this picture in my head. I've never heard that term before, of you guys going around in a car with a bunch of medicine balls and, you know, weights and things in your trunk and going door to door saying, hey, you want to get into shape? That wasn't it, was it?
Well, pretty close. We were almost like a Kirby bag.
Right. It was a little, so of course we had a clientele built up, or, you know, in that job that we were, let go from. And so a lot of them said, hey, will you come train us at our house? Because they left that business as well because they were so attached to us. And so then we started getting known in the area, like, hey, if you want training at the convenience of your own home, call Travis and Cyndy. They'll come, you know, and it will be convenient times for you. So, of course, we worked in the mornings, the afternoons, at night, weekends. Like, you know, we had to make ourselves available all the time in order to pay our bills. So it was tough.
I've never heard that, but that is a pretty cool idea. I mean, the only time I've ever heard of that was, you know, these sort of Hollywood elite uber rich who have, you know, a 3,000 square foot gym in their basement or something, and they'll have a personal trainer come to the house. But, you know, for the average people, I had never heard of that before. It's cool, though. I mean, I like that idea. So
ours was a little less glamorous. We worked people out next to their couches and
in the kitchen and wherever, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Business.
Yeah.
Okay, so what year was that you started the first place there?
The first Journey Fitness began in 2013. So we got to open it up. It was right around Easter. It was the end of March, right? Beginning of April of 2013.
Okay. And now you guys are franchised. How many locations do you have now?
Yeah, so now we have 4 locations in New York. We have one in Pennsylvania. There's one in Indiana. And then there's one in Florida.
Okay. So there are a lot of health clubs around the country. What is unique about Journey Fitness?
Yeah, what makes Journey unique, I would say, since the beginning, we've had this strong focus on customer service. And we've coined the phrase group personal coaching, because what we do is we include all the benefits of one-on-one while people are being trained in the group, which is a real win-win. They get all the benefits of one-on-one, but they get to share the cost of a coach with the group. And what I mean by benefits is typically if you were working out one-on-one with a coach, they'd probably weigh you in weekly, and every 6 weeks they'd update your measurements. They'd customize the routine based on your medical history, exercise history, and fitness goals. They'd help you with nutrition. And we do all that for the people that are being trained in the group. And that is just the beginning of what makes us unique. The other things that make us unique, Cyndy, you want to talk about some of our celebrations?
Yeah. So I love customer service, and I always have. Even when I was much younger, I love people, and I like making people feel good. Both of us do. So we recognize everybody's birthday. We do a report every single week of whose birthdays are going to be throughout that entire week. We give them a birthday card. We play birthday music. We, love on them and cheer and sing to them and all that kind of stuff. Just something unique and fun to celebrate them. We also know when they joined our facilities. And so we've been open 8 years now. And so we have a gift for each one of the years for their anniversary presents. So some people that have been with us for 8 years, they're getting an 8-year gift right now.
Wow,
so it's
great.
different gift each year, and you can't buy one. You have to stay at Journey and you get one. And we have a celebration song. We present the gift. The whole room cheers for them and claps, and we take pictures. We post it on, our social media. We love on them so much that they invite us to their birthday parties, their retirement parties, because we make them feel special, because we're so focused on our customer service. So.
Yeah, there are so many ways that we celebrate our members and customize the routines and make it feel like one-on-one. And beyond that, I would just say that we put the fun in functional fitness. Yeah. Many times people will be afraid to go to a gym because, one, it seems like such a chore to work out. And two, they wonder, can I do it? Will I fit in? Is there just Herculean guys in tank tops and women running around in spandex? And, will I fit into this place? And one, we make our fitness adaptable for everyone. We do our time under tension. It's just 30 seconds and an exercise that's appropriate for you, something like that. So then that way everybody can feel like they can do it. And then we make our fitness fun. People have a great workout, but it almost happens along the way while they're having fun. And what I mean by that is, like, Cinco de Mayo is coming up. You'll see us in sombreros on that day, coaching people that way. It's just fun. It's just
we do a lot to add. Like we'll do 80s theme, where everyone comes in all day Friday and all day Saturday dressed up in, headbands and leg warmers and, their hair as big as they can get it. And we take pictures and we give them prizes. And, we always try to make it super, super fun. Friday is always called Fun Friday because it's the brand new workout for the week. And people they post about us all the time. They're like, I can't wait to get to Journey. I can't wait to see what Fun Friday's bringing to us this week. And, so it's because we make it so fun that it doesn't feel like it's torturous event or that it's something they don't want to do. It's the fastest hour of their day. So.
Wow, that's great. Travis, you were mentioning a couple of movies throughout this interview. And now, just while you guys were talking, one popped into my head, which was Dodgeball. Have you seen that one?
I think I've seen the previews to it, more so clips from it, I guess.
You might want to check that one out because it's basically two rival gyms that go at each other in the dodgeball tournament, and one is sort of the one you were talking about, muscle guys and the spandex women, and the other one is kind of the people that are not that, and they go through a dodgeball tournament together. It's pretty funny.
Okay, I'll have to watch that. That sounds cool. That sounds cool, yeah.
So anyways, we got to kind of wind this down. So you're doing, as well as doing your gyms, and congratulations on your franchise, you're also doing motivational speaking. And I assume you're talking about basically what we've covered, in the interview?
Yeah, much of that. And the 10 years that I've spent incarcerated certainly brought me on an inward journey. And since that time, being able to evolve myself into a life coaching as well as training has just allowed me to be in a position to where I can coach people not only on business, but on mindset. Definitely takes a good positive mindset to overcome a decade of incarceration and then become an author and presenter and franchisor. So many of my presentations may include some elements, not so much to impress people, but to impress upon them that they can overcome their adversities too and live their dreams, but also just challenging people to really dig deep, find their passions, find their purpose, really live their dreams. And those are the types of presentations that just really, they move my soul, and it's my hope that I'm able to touch other people's hearts as well.
Well, that's great. And your book is called Journey Fitness. When did the book come out?
So Journey Fitness, that book just came out about 2 years ago.
Okay.
And then we wrote 52 amazing journeys that came out after that, because once we shared our adversity, we found all of our members wanted to share theirs.
Oh, so you made another book for them
so
too.
We did
All right.
short stories.
Okay, great. Last question, and then I'll let you go. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Sure, we'd love to. So journeyfitness333.com. You can learn about Journey Fitness. You can learn about franchising. TravisBarnesSpeaks.com. We have a speaker website there. And, of course, all the social media links to connect with us are also right there on that site.
Okay, great. Well, Travis, Cyndy, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. Very interesting. Very amazing.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.